Malika was just 14, small, quiet, and careful in everything she did. After losing her parents in a car crash, she was sent to live with her father's brother, Uncle Vernon, and his wife, Aunt Thelma, in a dusty rural town called Kimbara, tucked at the edge of the countryside. Their compound was cramped but had enough space, for everyone but her. From the first day, Malika felt like she didn't belong. Aunt Thelma didn't even fake a smile. She just looked her up and down like inspecting a stray cat that wandered in from the street. Uncle Vernon barely said a word. "You'll manage here," he mumbled before disappearing into his room. That night, Malika slept on a worn-out mat in the corridor, the scent of old dust and kerosene stinging her nose. The house had 4 rooms, but none were for her. Her cousin, Jalen, who was 19 and jobless, had his own room and treated her like dirt. He only ever talked to Malika when sending her to run errands or mocking her with cruel jokes. The next morning, Aunt Thelma shoved a cracked broom and rusted bucket into Malika's hands. "Before the sun touches the roof, this place better. Be clean," she barked. Malika got to work. She swept the compound until her back ached. She fetched water from the far-off stream, washed grimy plates, and cooked food she wasn't even allowed to taste. On most days, she survived on burnt rice scraped from the pot or whatever pap was left over. But no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. If a spoon went missing, Malika was blamed. If Jalen came home late, Malika was questioned. If the soup burned, Malika was cursed. They never called her by name. She was always that girl, the orphan, or the one without a mother. Jalen, on the other hand, lived like a king. He slept till noon, ate the food Malika prepared, tossed his dirty clothes on the floor, and spent the rest of the day scrolling through his phone. No chores, no shame. While Malika was bent over sweeping, Jalen snored with his legs spread wide. When she fetched firewood, he complained about boredom. When she washed clothes under the hot sun, he laughed with his friends, sometimes pointing at her like she was part of the joke. But the day Jalen failed his exams, everything exploded. Aunt Thelma stormed into the kitchen like a whirlwind and yanked Malika by the arm. Her eyes blazed with fury. "So this is why my son failed?" she shouted. "Because you've been throwing yourself at him, distracting him, sneaking into his room." Malika froze. "Auntie, no, I've never—" "Slap!" The slap landed hard and fast, ringing in Malika's ears. Her cheek stung as she staggered back, nearly falling into the open fire pit. "You nasty little thing," Aunt Thelma shouted. "Trying to sleep with your own cousin like your mother? You want to disgrace this family, eh?" Malika collapsed to the floor, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her lips were dry, her chest heavy. Uncle Vernon stood in the doorway watching. He didn't say a word. Then he turned and walked away. Aunt Thelma dragged Malika by her braids and shoved her out the front door. "Stay outside, don't you dare come back in." That night, Malika slept on the bare ground of the compound. The cold nipped at her bones. Mosquitoes buzzed around her ears. Her stomach growled with hunger. But what hurt the most was the silence. No one believed her. No one even asked her side. Inside the house, they laughed, they ate. They carried on like she didn't exist. And Malika, curled up like trash in the dirt, didn't know it then. But her life was about to change forever. By morning, Malika's limbs ached from the cold ground. Her skin was damp with dew. Her cheek still throbbed from Aunt Thelma's slap. But even worse than the pain was the shame. No one had come to check on her, not even once. Later that afternoon, just as the sun began to dip, Aunt Thelma returned with fury in her footsteps. She marched Malika to the front of the compound like dragging a thief caught stealing from a neighbor's pot. "Come and see what this girl has done," she shouted, loud enough to wake the ancestors. The neighborhood stirred. Women tied their wrappers tighter and stepped out. Men leaned against wooden poles, chewing sticks. Children peeked from behind mothers' legs. Everyone came to see the spectacle. "This useless orphan," Aunt Thelma yelled, jabbing a finger at Malika, "has been seducing her cousin." Gasps spread like ripples on water. "She's always entering his room, playing little tricks. Girl with no shame, just like her nobody parents. Malika's eyes widened. My parents weren't nobodies, she whispered. Aunt Thelma turned sharply. What did you say? My mama was Mama Tess. My father. Who knows what they really were? Aunt Thelma spat, raising her voice even louder. Nobody even knows where this girl came from. They just dropped her here like leftover yam. The crowd began to murmur. Someone clicked their tongue. Another shook their head. No one said anything. In Malika's defense, not one. She even had the nerve to sneak into Jalen's room, Thelma continued, her eyes gleaming with wicked satisfaction. We caught her red-handed. Malika's lips parted. That's a lie. Shut up! Aunt Thelma raised her hand again and Malika flinched, eyes squeezing shut. But this time, the slap didn't come. Only more venomous words. You are cursed. A disgrace. A stain on this family. The crowd whispered louder now. One woman muttered, a small girl like her, who knows what else she's capable of? Malika looked around. Faces she knew, faces she had greeted every morning while sweeping the compound, now stared at her like she was filth. Still trembling, Malika decided to try one more time. The next morning, as the dew lifted from the ground and birds chirped, without a care she spotted Jalen under the mango tree, phone in hand like always. She walked toward him, hands shaking, voice soft. Jalen, please, she whispered. You know I didn't do anything. Please, tell them the truth. He looked up at her slowly. For a moment, Malika thought he might, just might, stand up for her. Instead, he stood and cleared his throat. Please, my people, he began loudly, seeing a small crowd already gathering. Don't be fooled by her innocent face. Malika froze. This girl, he said with mock sadness, has been disturbing me, entering my room, touching me, whispering things. Gasps again. I've been keeping quiet because I didn't want trouble, but enough is enough. Malika's world collapsed around her, her knees buckled. No, she whispered. You're lying. But her voice was drowned by the rising noise of judgment. She looks sweet, someone said, but it's always the quiet ones. Malika turned to the faces. Those same villagers she helped with water greeted respectfully. All of them were nodding, agreeing with Jalen's lies. And then, like it had been rehearsed, Aunt Thelma stepped forward and shouted, That's it. I've made my decision. Silence. This girl is leaving this house today. She's getting married. What? Malika whispered. From the crowd stepped an old man. His wrapper was frayed at the edges. He leaned heavily on a cane. His beard was white as chalk and his back curved like a crescent moon. Whispers spread. He's not from here. Just a trader passing through. Aunt Thelma grabbed Malika's arm and shoved her forward. This is your husband now. He's taking you today. The crowd erupted into cruel laughter. Oh, she's lucky, oh. One woman cackled. Who else would marry a girl like her? Let her go and learn some manners. Malika cried out, tried to pull back. Please, no, I don't even know him. I haven't done anything. Her clothes, stuffed into a nylon bag, were flung at her feet. Take your things, Aunt Thelma snapped. And go. Tears blurred Malika's vision. Her legs wouldn't move. But the old man had already turned. With eyes on her, the villagers watched her take slow, broken steps after him. Behind her, laughter rang out. Mockery echoed. Malika didn't look back. She couldn't. That part of her life, whatever it had been, was now over. The road they took was narrow and dry, cutting between tall grass and scattered mango trees. Malika's feet ached with every step. The small plastic bag in her hand felt heavier than bricks. Not because of what was inside, just 2 dresses, a wrapper, and her worn-out sandals, but because it symbolized everything she had just lost. The old man didn't speak. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, his steps uneven but sure. Malika dared not ask where they were going. What would be the point? No one had ever answered her before. After what felt like forever, they reached a small mud hut on the outskirts of a forgotten hamlet. The roof sagged in the middle, patched with rusted tin and palm fronds. The door creaked open on its own. "This is where we'll sleep tonight," the old man finally said, his voice low, like a whisper meant for the wind. Malika stepped inside cautiously. It was cleaner than she expected. A thin mat lay neatly in the corner beside a lantern and a stool. A little shelf sat on one wall with a few old books stacked sideways. She dropped her bag and sat on the floor, her bones still aching from the night before. She was too tired to cry, too drained to ask why. The old man moved with care. He lit the lantern, reached into a clay pot, and brought out 2 pieces of roasted yam. He placed one on a chipped metal plate and held it out to her. "Eat." Malika stared at the food. She hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Her throat tightened. Her hands shook as she accepted the plate. "Thank you," she mumbled. The man didn't respond. He walked to the opposite corner of the hut and sat with his back against the wall. He didn't speak another word. He didn't touch her. He didn't even look at her again. For the first time in weeks, Malika wasn't afraid of being slapped, insulted, or kicked awake in the middle of the night. The silence was different here. It wasn't heavy with judgment, it was just silence. Wrapped in her old wrapper, Malika laid on the mat and stared at the low ceiling. She waited for something, anything, a threat, a command, a cruel joke. But none came. She fell asleep before she could even wipe her tears. And that night, for the first time in what felt like forever, her body rested. The next morning, the scent of something boiling woke her. She sat up quickly, still disoriented. The old man was cooking porridge in a small pot over firewood outside. His movements were quiet, practiced, calm. He handed her a bowl without a word. They sat on opposite sides of the hut, eating in silence. When she finished, she licked the spoon clean and placed the bowl gently on the floor. "We'll leave by noon," he said simply. Malika nodded. She didn't know where they were going, but she didn't ask. What mattered was that she wasn't. Going back, as she waited, her eyes wandered. She noticed the man had opened one of his books. The cover had strange words she couldn't pronounce. He read slowly, his lips moving silently as his eyes scanned the page. Then he reached into a worn cloth bag and pulled out a phone. A sleek, modern phone. Clean, black, uncracked. Malika blinked in disbelief. People in Kembara barely had torchlights. Even Jalen's phone had a broken screen and a missing back cover. But this man, dressed in faded clothes, living in a cracked hut, had a phone that looked like something out of a commercial. He dialed a number and spoke in English. Not just regular English, the kind with a deep accent, smooth and polished like the people on the radio. Then he switched to another language, something Malika had never heard before. His voice shifted with each tongue, calm and commanding. She stared. Who was this man? Why would someone like him, who read foreign books, spoke in tongues, and held a phone that didn't match his clothes, come all the way to her village? Why would he take in a girl like her? Once he caught her staring. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything, just gave her a faint smile, quick, quiet, and turned back. To his book. In that moment, Malika's fear began to tangle with suspicion, and something else she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Just after midday, as the sun climbed to its peak, the old man, who now introduced himself as Mr. Otis Guidado, led Malika to a waiting pickup truck. The driver barely spoke a word, only nodded when Otis greeted him. The road to the city was rough, bumpy, dusty, with potholes that rattled the bones, but Malika didn't mind. Each passing mile took her further away from Aunt Thelma's cruelty, from the village that had spit her out. She didn't ask questions. She didn't care where they were going. Anything was better than going back. By sunset, they arrived in a small town on the outskirts of the city. Otis paid for a guest room at a roadside inn, peeling crisp notes from a hidden pocket in his shirt. That night, Malika went to fetch water from a public tap by the fence. She barely noticed the 2 boys loitering in the shadows, until one of them whistled. "Hey, pretty girl, where you rushing off to?" one called, grabbing her wrist. "Let go of me," Malika yelled, struggling. The second boy laughed. "Feisty, huh?" Before she could scream, Otis was there. Fast, silent. His cane struck the first boy's leg with a crack. The boy yelped and collapsed. The second bolted into the dark without looking back. Malika stood frozen. She had never seen anyone move that quickly, especially not an old man with a limp. Back in the room, her hands still shaking, she sat by the window while Otis sat beside her. "You need to know the truth," he said softly. She turned to him, confused. "I'm not a beggar," he said. "I'm a private investigator. I work for a powerful family. I came to your village after following new information." Malika blinked. "What information?" He opened his satchel and pulled out a thin file. Inside were faded documents, old photographs, and a hospital wristband. He held up a photo, tattered at the corners, of a baby girl with big eyes and soft curls. Malika gasped. She had seen that photo before. Her mother, Mama Tess, had once shown her a similar one tucked inside an old biscuit tin. That's me." Otis nodded slowly. "Your real name is Malika Obasi. You're the daughter of Chief Deshaun Obasi, one of the most prominent men in the city. You were kidnapped as a toddler shortly after your biological mother passed." Malika's head spun. "No, that can't be true. My father is Baba Okan. My mother was Mama Tess. They raised me, they loved me. We were poor, but they were kind." Tears filled her eyes. Otis watched her without interrupting. His expression wasn't pity. It was something deeper. Respect. Maybe. Patience. She fell to the floor, gripping the photograph. Her mind flooded with memories. Aunt Thelma calling her a curse, saying no one knew where she came from. The whispers about her light skin, how she didn't resemble either of the Okans. The way villagers eyed her like a question with no answer. It all made sense now. Her whole life had been built on a lie. Her voice broke as she asked, "What now?" Otis spoke gently. "Now, we go meet your real father." The city rose before her like something out of a dream. Glass towers that scraped the clouds, roads that buzzed with 1,000 engines, people moving like waves, each with a place to go. Malika had never seen so much motion, so much light, so much life. She sat quietly in the back of the black car that came to pick them up from the bus terminal, hands folded in her lap, heart thumping so loudly she thought the driver might hear. Beside her, Otis sat steady and calm, eyes forward, saying only, "We're almost there." The car slowed as it approached a white-walled mansion with a fountain in front that danced under golden lights. The gates, taller than any she'd ever seen, opened slowly, almost respectfully. A uniformed guard waved them through. Malika couldn't breathe. Inside, the marble floors sparkled. Glass chandeliers hung like frozen rain. Walls were lined with portraits of powerful men in designer suits shaking hands with presidents and foreign dignitaries. And then, one of those men stepped forward from the hallway. He was tall, well-groomed, his skin smooth like he'd never worked. A rough day in his life, but his eyes, they looked like hers. Deep brown, sharp, sad. Chief Deshaun Obasi. He stopped a few steps from her. They stared at each other. His lips parted as if he meant to speak, but before he could say anything, a woman entered the room. Tall, elegant, dressed in gold and crimson, lace. Her jewelry jingled with every move. Her face was beautiful but tight with suspicion. "Deshaun," she said sharply, "who is this?" He turned to her gently. "Regina, this is Malika, my daughter." Regina's eyes narrowed. "Daughter from where?" "She's the child I've been searching for," he said, softer now. "For 15 years. Malika stood frozen. Regina looked her up and down like she was a speck on the white marble floor. "DNA?" she asked. Otis stepped forward. "It's already arranged." Regina didn't say another word. She simply turned and walked away. the scent of her perfume lingering in the silence like judgment. Later that evening, Malika sat alone, in a guest room too beautiful to feel comfortable. The bed was soft, so soft it felt wrong. The curtains were silk, the windows taller than the roof of her old village home. But still, the air was cold. That's when the door creaked open. A girl stood there, about her age, maybe younger. Hair perfectly braided, nails painted light pink, skin gleaming like polished mahogany. "I'm Kenya," the girl said, folding her arms. "This is my house, my family, and I don't share." Then she turned and left. Malika stood in silence, staring at the floor. So this was the life she was meant to have? Why did it feel just like the one she escaped? Cold, unwelcoming, and distant. The next morning, they drove to the hospital. The DNA test was done with quiet urgency. No one spoke much. Chief Obasi kept glancing at her, like trying to recognize something long forgotten. 2 days later, the results arrived. Positive. Malika Obasi was his daughter, but nothing changed. Regina still avoided her. Kenya rolled her eyes and whispered cruel things when passing in the hallway. The house, grand as it was, felt emptier than the cracked hut she had slept in with Otis. She was a stranger in a home that should have been hers, a guest in her own bloodline. Again. Malika spent her days moving like a ghost through the mansion. No one said it aloud, but their eyes said everything. Regina barely acknowledged her. Kenya smirked whenever they crossed paths. Even the house staff, who smiled at Regina and bowed when Kenya passed, acted unsure around Malika, whispering as she walked by. Her meals were served politely but without warmth. Her clothes were new, but they still felt borrowed. Her room had all the trappings of wealth: a walk-in closet, a queen-size bed, polished wooden floors, but no love lived in the corners. One evening, she passed by the grand staircase and heard voices. She paused. Behind the door of Chief Obasi's private study, Regina's voice hissed with sharp precision. "She's here now. So what next? You know what this means for Kenya's inheritance? Don't you?" There was silence. Then Chief Obasi spoke, lower but clear. "She's my daughter. And you owe it to Kenya," Regina snapped. "You think she's going to accept sharing everything with a girl dragged out of a village? What will people say? What will our friends say?" Malika stepped back slowly, her stomach twisting into knots. So that was it. To them, she wasn't a daughter. She was a disruption, a complication, a living threat to their perfect picture. That night, she sat by the wide glass window in her room. Outside, the garden looked like something out of a painting. Roses in perfect bloom, a fountain trickling in the moonlight. But inside, her heart weighed like stone. She thought she would feel whole here. She thought finding her real father would fix everything, but all she felt was invisible. Again. She missed Mama Tessa's laughter. She missed Baba Okan's stories under the moonlight. She missed sleeping on the floor and waking up to the scent of pap boiling. She missed belonging. And it hurt. It hurt more than anything Aunt Thelma had ever said. Because now she knew the truth of her blood, but it came with no love. Late into the night, Malika packed a small bag, her Bible, her mother's wrapper, the few clothes Regina had reluctantly given her. She tiptoed down the quiet hallways, past the portraits and marble busts, and slipped out through the side gate. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to breathe. She needed space to be, but she wasn't alone. As she reached the edge of the quiet city road, footsteps emerged from the shadows. "Malika," she froze. Otis stood there, his crutch tapping gently on the pavement. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. "Where are you going?" he asked. Malika wiped her tears, but they kept falling. "I thought this place would feel like home," she whispered. "But it doesn't. They don't want me. Not really. Even my father can't stand up for me." Otis took a deep breath. He didn't come closer, but his presence wrapped around her like a blanket. "You've been through worse," he said. "You've been thrown out, lied on, humiliated, and you're still standing. She looked down. I'm tired of standing. I know, he replied gently, but you don't need their acceptance to prove your worth. His voice firmed. Let your presence shame their doubt. Malika looked up. The night was still, quiet, but those words filled the space like thunder. She didn't speak again, just turned slowly and walked back through the gate, with Otis behind her, not as a beggar for love, but as a girl who was done begging to be seen. Days passed, then weeks. At first, nothing changed. Malika still ate in silence. Kenya still threw daggers with her eyes. Regina still spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, and even then with tight lips and cold breath. But something had shifted. Malika no longer walked with her head down. She no longer moved like a shadow in someone else's home. Now she sat up straight. She asked questions. She stood still when spoken to and replied calmly, no matter the tone. She was no longer hoping to be welcomed. She was determined to be seen. One evening, she came down to the garden and found Chief Obasi standing by the hibiscus bush, hands in his pockets, staring into nothing. When he saw her, he gestured for her to sit beside him on the bench. She hesitated, then walked over and sat down. For a moment, there was only the sound of the fountain trickling behind them. Then his voice broke the silence. Soft, unsure. I owe you an apology, Malika. She blinked, surprised. I failed you, he continued, his voice trembling. Not just as a father, but as a man. I should have found you sooner. I should have protected you from the people who made you feel invisible. Malika's heart beat, slowly in her chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same photograph Otis had shown her, the faded baby picture with the big eyes and soft curls. I carried this for years, he said, wondering if you were still alive, wondering if you were happy. I never imagined that while I was living in comfort, my daughter was being dragged through mud. Tears welled in Malika's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I can't fix the past, Chief Obasi whispered, but I promise you I will give you the best future I can, starting now. And he kept his word. The very next week, Malika was enrolled in one of the best secondary schools in the city. It was intimidating. Students spoke polished English with foreign accents. Their uniforms were crisp, their books brand new. Some of them looked at her like she was a curiosity. But Malika wasn't shaken. She dove into her studies with the same fire that once helped her learn by candlelight back in Kimbara. She read late into the night. She asked questions no one else asked. She raised her hand when others stayed silent. She didn't just study, she attacked her education. Math, science, literature, technology, everything she'd once dreamed of, but thought unreachable, she now embraced like it had always been hers. Teachers noticed. She began winning prizes. First place in science. Best in mathematics, creative writing awards, a scholarship for her final year. Then another, this time, to a prestigious university in the city. Her choice? Biometric engineering. Not because anyone told her to, but because she had seen what technology could do, how it could connect people, expose lies, and build futures. She wanted to create tools that gave voice to the forgotten. She still carried her mother's old wrapper everywhere she went. It was the only piece of her past that felt like home. Kenya still mocked her sometimes. Regina still never offered affection, but Malika no longer waited for their warmth. She had found fire inside herself, and it burned brighter than any spotlight money could offer. University opened a new world for Malika. It wasn't just the buildings, or the labs or the lecture halls filled with polished wood and air-conditioned chill. It was the freedom, the clarity. For the first time in her life, she was defined not by her past or her pain, but by her potential. She walked the campus with quiet confidence, her hair tied neatly, her notebooks full of color-coded dreams. While other students wore designer clothes and carried imported bags, Malika kept it simple: second-hand jeans, canvas shoes, a sharp mind. She spent nights in the library, Her dorm room desk was always cluttered with wires, scraps of metal, textbooks, and blueprints. She was building something, and it wasn't just for grades. By her third year, Malika unveiled her invention, a portable diagnostic device, small, enough to fit in one hand, powerful enough to detect early signs of illnesses that usually went undiagnosed in rural communities like Canberra. The device used biometric scanning to check for fevers, infections, even irregular heart rhythms. She named it Eve, short for Empowerment via Examination. At the campus science exhibition, silence followed her demonstration. Then one of the judges, a senior professor with thick glasses and thinning hair, stood and began to clap. Slowly others followed. That day her name began to leave campus grounds. Local health organizations called. Journalists wrote features. Blogs praised the village girl who engineered a medical revolution. Scholarships began arriving from overseas. Tech conferences sent invitations. She gave interviews, not as a prodigy, but as a story of resilience. Through it all, Otis watched from the sidelines. He didn't cheer loudly, he didn't brag, but he showed up every time. He sat quietly in the back row at every event, nodded when her name was called, kept clippings of every article with her face on it, folded neatly in his coat pocket. One night, as they sat beneath the stars after a small health tech conference, he turned to her and said, "You're doing good. Don't stop. The world needs women like you." She squeezed his wrinkled hand. "I learned it from you." But just before her final exams, Otis didn't wake up one morning, peacefully, in his sleep, just like he lived. Quiet, still, and strong. Malika was devastated. She didn't cry in public. She couldn't. But in private, she wept like a little girl who had lost the only man who never made her feel like she had to prove she mattered. She buried Otis beside a quiet river in the town he loved. At his burial, no crowd came. No cameras. Just her, the wind, the trees, and the memories of a man who gave everything without asking for anything in return. Back in his small room, she found journals, neatly stacked, filled with names, maps, cases, reflections, and prayers. She locked them in a wooden box and labeled it, "For the Forgotten Ones." And then she launched the Otis Guidado Foundation, known as the GDO Trust, in his honor. A scholarship and support initiative for orphaned girls like her. Girls with no name. Girls with no voice. Girls whose pain had made them powerful. Surgeries were funded. Hostels were built. Uniforms handed out. Food programs established. Schools supported. Malika didn't just pay back, she paid forward. And every time someone asked her, "What's your biggest achievement?" she would smile and say, "The GDO Trust." Because it came from a man who found me when I was nothing and believed in me before anyone else did. Back in Canberra, a village that once watched Malika carry water barefoot, things were changing. Her name, once mocked, was now spoken in whispers of awe. Radio hosts discussed her invention. Blogs called her a national treasure. Her face appeared on the covers of tech magazines. Schools used her story as a case study on resilience. Whenever she appeared on TV, the small viewing center near the market filled with villagers craning their necks to catch a glimpse. Is that not Malika? The same one they threw out? She's shining like a queen now. Even the children who once giggled behind her back now looked up to her with wide, hopeful eyes. But not everyone was celebrating. Uncle Vernon's once profitable land dealings collapsed. It was discovered he'd been forging land documents, and one morning, officers in navy blue shirts arrived. Villagers watched from behind half-closed doors as Vernon was led away in handcuffs. Aunt Thelma, left alone, no longer had people waving at her in the market. Neighbors who once backed her crossed the street when they saw her coming. The same women who had clicked their tongues at Malika now whispered and shook their heads when Thelma walked by. Her shame was loud, but her guilt was louder. Jalen, once puffed up with pride, had long been expelled from school. He had been caught, trying to force himself on a female student. No one came to defend him. Parents warned their daughters to stay far away, and then sickness came. Thelma began coughing blood. Her legs swelled. Her eyes lost their spark. The small clinic in the neighboring town said she needed surgery, fast, but the money required was far more than she or her family had. With Vernon in prison and Jalen unemployed, there was no one to help. And yet, every night, Thelma thought about Malika, not just with regret, but with longing, with shame. She couldn't bring herself to call. What would she say? That the girl she once called a disgrace was now her only hope? Then, one Sunday morning, a quiet knock came at the GDO Trust headquarters. Malika looked up from her desk. Her assistant entered. "There's a man here. He says he's from your village." A moment later, Pastor Solomon walked in, hat in hand, face bowed. He had once watched from his window while Malika scrubbed the compound floor in the early morning light. He had seen her dragged through dirt and had said nothing. Now, his voice was soft. "My daughter," he said, "I come not for myself, but on behalf of a woman who once called you names." Malika didn't flinch. She just stared at him. "She's dying," he added. "She needs surgery. There's no money." Malika took a deep breath. Her chest rose slowly. She looked down at the folder in her hands, then closed it. The same woman who threw her out like garbage now needed her kindness to live. She didn't respond immediately. She just sat in silence, memories flooding like water bursting through a dam. Cold nights on concrete floors, the slap across her cheek, the false accusations, the laughter of neighbors who didn't care. "She said I was cursed," Malika whispered. "She said I would bring shame." Pastor Solomon bowed his head. "She knows that now. Every day she lives with it." Malika stood and walked to the window. Outside, children played in the garden. Girls in neatly pressed uniforms carried books across the lawn, their joy echoing through the air. She watched them, little versions of herself, full of fire. Then she turned around. "Tell the doctors to prepare," she said. "Send me the bill." And that was it. No phone call, no grand statement, no demand for apology. Just quiet grace. The surgery saved Aunt Thelma's life. Word spread quickly, from the hospital corridors to the streets of Kimbara to the offices in the capital. People shook their heads, stunned. She helped her? After all that, someone asked Malika why she did it. She answered only once and softly, "Because if I don't rise above the pain, I'll never rise at all." As the years passed, Malika's presence expanded far beyond the halls of the GDO Trust. She became more than a name tied to an invention, more than a face on a magazine. She became a voice for girls who had none, a voice that carried pain and power in the same breath. Invitations came in waves, from science panels in Johannesburg to girls' leadership forums in Nairobi, from medical tech summits in Paris to empowerment conferences in New York. Each time Malika stood, not just as a guest, but as a force. She spoke gently, but her words landed like thunder. She didn't tell stories to impress. She told the truth of what it meant to be abandoned, to sleep on cold concrete, to be called a curse, to survive lies, silence, betrayal, and still rise. At one international conference in Lagos, she stood on a red-carpeted stage before scientists, world leaders, and young scholars from across the continent. Cameras flashed, notebooks flipped, murmurs quieted, and then she spoke. "Was born in a place where dreams are often buried before they bloom. I was called a disgrace before I even had a voice, but I wasn't broken. I was being built. Today I don't speak only for myself. I speak for every girl who was ever told she was too small to matter." The room erupted in applause. In the front row, Chief Deshaun Obasi, now grayer, slower, but with eyes full of emotion, stood and wiped his face. He took the microphone and said, "My daughter has taught me more about strength than any man I've ever known. I failed her once, but I will never fail her again." That same week, he summoned his lawyers. His will was rewritten, His businesses, assets, and properties, once intended solely for Kenya, were now divided evenly between his children. And no one protested, not even Regina, because by then, even she had seen it. Malika didn't come to take, she came to give. And in giving, she became everything they thought she couldn't. Despite her access to untouchable wealth, Malika never dipped into it for herself. Not for a mansion, not for cars, not even for the softest shoes. Every penny she inherited was poured back into the foundation. Clinics were built in places without running water. Surgical teams were trained. Orphan girls across the continent were flown to hospitals, enrolled in schools, taught to code, mentored by engineers, and reminded daily, your past is not your prison, it's your preparation. The GDO Trust became a symbol, a promise, and everywhere Malika went, that name followed her, not because of status, but because of impact. And when the time came, she returned to Kambara, the village where she was once spat on, where her name was once cursed, where she had once been dragged through the dirt like something worthless. She didn't come in luxury cars or designer gowns. She came in a clean, modest suit, her hair braided, her spirit calm. People gathered like bees. Word had spread. The whole village turned out holding their breath. She really came back. She looks just like her mother. She came to punish us, eh? But Malika stepped onto the old wooden platform by the village square, beside the mango tree where she once begged Jalen to tell the truth, and looked over the crowd. Her voice was steady. I didn't come here for revenge, she said. I came with remembrance. Let my story be a lesson. Every child, no matter how poor, no matter how voiceless, deserves to be seen. Then she turned toward the building at the edge of the village, a newly painted blue-roofed structure with the sign, the AET Okon Scholarship House, dedicated to Mama Tess and Baba Okon. For the parents who had nothing, Malika said, voice cracking, but gave me everything. People clapped, some cried. Even those who once laughed at her wept silently. And then she quietly made her way to the graves behind the old house where her childhood ended. 2 small cement slabs. No fancy tiles. No flowers. Just names etched by hand. She laid down 2 bunches of white and yellow flowers, knelt, placed her hand on the soil and whispered, "Thank you for loving me before the world did." She stayed there for a long time. No camera, no speech, just her and them. A few months later, Malika stood on the grandest stage of her life, an international summit for women in global leadership held in Geneva. Her face was printed on banners hung across glass walls. Her name was stitched into lanyards. Her story had traveled across borders and oceans. Scholars, scientists, activists, presidents, and CEOs gathered under one roof to witness a girl who had once slept on a bare floor now stand before the world. As the hall dimmed, a spotlight found her. Malika walked onto the stage, head high, steps firm, spirit calm. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need to. She carried truth. And when she spoke, the silence was heavy with reverence. I was the girl who fetched water barefoot at dawn. I was the one accused, humiliated, and thrown away. I was told I'd bring shame, that I'd never be loved. But here I am. I didn't rise because someone made space for me. I rose because I created space. I rose because I had to. Because so many others didn't get the chance, and now, I carry them with me. The crowd didn't move. Not at first. Then slowly, as if stunned back into motion, they stood, one by one until the entire auditorium thundered in applause. In the front row, Chief Deshaun Obasi clapped with trembling hands. He was older now, slower, but his tears glistened with pride. Later, a journalist asked Malika a question during a panel. You've done so much. What's next? When will you get married? The room chuckled. Malika smiled. When the right person comes, she said. Not someone who wants what I have, but someone who sees who I am. That night, as city lights blinked across the horizon like stars, Malika stood by her hotel window, heart full and still. She had come from nothing. She had gained everything. But, more than all of it, she had become something no one could take away. Not just a billionaire's daughter, not just an inventor or a leader. She had become a story, and stories, when told with truth, with pain, with grace, they live forever.